Today's poem is Tissue by Imtiaz Dharka. It's often held up as an example of one of the most difficult poems in the anthology. But instead of thinking about it literally, what we have to remember about this poem is that it is an impressionistic poem. Now, if you think about an impressionistic painting, you might think of a painting that gives a suggestion of something but isn't actually physically exactly as that object might be. And the poem that is impressionistic is exactly like that. It's not to be taken literally, it's more to be taken on a metaphorical, symbolic level. Okay, so think about paper as a symbol, and the title of the poem itself as Tissue takes an example of paper, tissue paper, fragile, see-through, transparent, easily destroyed, easily moved. And if you take that overall metaphor, that is the extended metaphor of the poem. The idea that paper holds a lot of power, but actually paper also has properties that is fragile, easily destroyed, easily moved. Let's start by thinking about some of the objects that are made out of paper but have quite a lot of power in society, and I've listed a few here. Let's start with maps. Now, maps in themselves don't have the power, but you've got to think about maps again as a symbol of national boundaries. Nationality isn't a natural thing. And you might use natural boundaries, rivers, mountains, etc. But the concept of being a nation isn't a natural thing, because actually it divides different people. And what Imtiaz Dharka is saying is that we use maps and their constructs of a national boundary to separate people into differences, rather than celebrating what she thinks we should, in that we are all human. Just look at the last line of the poem, turned into your skin, because the other meaning of the word tissue, of course, is human tissue, human flesh. And the idea is that Dharka is trying to suggest that we are all similar. We're not divided by nations, and that actually maps hold too much power. They split us up, they divide us, they don't allow us to cross. That brings us on to passports. Our passport, made out of paper, an object that has an enormous amount of power, because if it's taken away, it takes away our freedom of movement, our freedom to go from one place to another. Passports actually serve to keep us separate, really, don't they? To keep us in one place, to know where we are, to control our movement from one place to another, like a visa that you would get to allow you to go to America, for example, or to many other countries. So passports are a method of control. Let's take religious texts. Now, we're living in times where religion is enormously divisive. And Imtiaz Dharka herself comes from a British Pakistani background, so has a Muslim background herself. Now, in response to the attacks on the Twin Tower, many Western nations started to develop a sense of Islamophobia, a fear of Islam. And that sometimes manifested itself in hate rather than in discussion and openness. And really this poem is all about not using religion as a method to divide, but actually we all in some way have our beliefs, whether they're religious beliefs or not. We have our religious beliefs. It's a poem about tolerance, about being open. And so religious texts are seen as something that have power, but really the power is only for those who believe in them. They shouldn't be there to divide us, but we should be tolerant that each of us has a close relationship with our own religious texts. Let's take certificates, money. All of these things are ways that paper holds some sort of power. Let's take marriage certificates to prove that you are in love with someone, a divorce certificate to prove that you are now not in love with that person, that you've moved on, birth certificates that prove our very existence, death certificates that prove our end of existence. All of those certificates have power. They're all made out of paper. And money, I know we're getting sort of polymer plastic money now, but effectively money is made out of paper, and it's a way of controlling the rich and the poor, a division within society. But another example, another symbol of where paper has power. And what links all of these types of power is political power. It is really the geopolitics that enforces these paper powers upon us. So Imtiaz Darqa takes this idea of paper having power and actually thinks about it in two ways. We should own that power ourselves. If that power is created by paper, then actually we should think of it as easily shiftable, easily changeable. It's transparent, it's see-through. It shouldn't hold that much power, so it can easily change. And power that lasts never lasts for very long. In that way, quite a similar message to Ozymandias. But it also takes the idea of paper as something to be cherished, and there's a lot of tactile verbs and tactile words used through this poem that suggests that we should have power as people, not be controlled by the power of paper itself. Now, the whole poem is a reflective monologue. It is Imtiaz Darqa's thoughts coming out on paper, if you like, the way that she's written it. And the whole tone is quite reflective and quite thoughtful. She doesn't necessarily come to conclusions. She just gets us to think about power within society. But actually, the one thing that makes us all similar is the power we all have as human beings. Let's read it through. Paper that lets the light shine through. This is what could alter things. Paper thinned by age or touching, the kind you'd find in well-used books, the back of the Quran, where a hand has written in the names and histories, who was born to whom, the height and weight, who died where and how, on which sepia date. Pages smoothed and stroked and turned transparent with attention. If buildings were paper, I might feel their drift, see how easily they fall away on a sigh, a shift in the direction of the wind. Maps too. The sun shines through their borderlines, the marks that rivers make, roads, rail tracks, mountain folds, fine slips from grocery shops that say how much was sold and what was paid by credit card might fly our lives like paper kites. An architect could use all this, place layer over layer, luminous script over numbers over line, and never wish to build again with brick or block, but let the daylight break through capitals and monoliths. Through the shapes that pride can make. Find a way to trace a grand design with living tissue, raise a structure never meant to last, of paper smoked and smoothed and stroked and thinned to be transparent, turned into your skin. We'll break it down into three different parts. Now remember, it's an impressionistic poem. We're not meant to take this literally. Imtiaz Darqa is not saying that the whole world should be made of paper, but more takes that idea of paper and runs with the fact that it holds so much power, and yet we could use it to shape things in different ways. And again, with a difficult poem, just pick out the bits that are really clear, the bits that you really understand, and run with those. Look for those quotes that you can get 3 layers of interpretation out of, so that you can really dig deep with the sections that you really understand. Let's start with the reflective monologue we've talked about, shown through enjambment. There's lots and lots of run-on lines from one to the other, so it's like the thoughts coming out one by one. And later on in the poem, Imtiaz Darqa writes that we talk about placing layer over layer. So the idea is that these thoughts come one after each other, reflected through the enjambment and the lack of a lot of end-stop lines. The tone is really positive. She's not complaining about this political power, just thoughtful about it and how we should embrace the power and embrace the power of paper and use it to be positive, use it to celebrate our similarity rather than our difference. So we could look at the key quote for today, paper that lets the light shine through. So let's look at interpretations of that. First of all, you've got the extended metaphor of the paper, which we've talked about enough already in terms of the power that it holds. So you've got that metaphor of the paper, but paper that lets the light shine through. You can link that to the idea of transparent. Those two quotes go nicely together. But where you've got light, you've also got positivity. In most of literature, it's a common reoccurring symbol of light as a symbol of hope, a symbol of optimism, a symbol of positivity. And Darker uses that symbol of light to reflect how paper can be used positively, the light that comes through. She's positive about how we can embrace the power itself. Let's take the word transparent, which comes a little bit further down on line 12 within the poem. Now, transparent can mean see-through, naturally see-through, like the paper that lets the light shine through. So if I held up some paper to the window over there, I would be able to see through it on this sunny day because it's letting the light through. But also, transparent means that you are open, you are clear. So a government who is transparent communicates well with its subjects, allows people to understand their working, allows people to understand why decisions are made. And that idea of paper letting light shine through and transparent, that transparency, is as much about those in power being clear to people, being open, being approachable, explaining things clearly to us as people, as a population. Paper that lets the light shine through, this is what could alter things. And notice that tone of the modal verb there, that could alter things. So it's a positive change that could happen. There's no certainty in that, but there's a possibility that we could change and shift power in society by paper. This is what could alter things. She's looking at change. Alter, of course, means to change, but in this way, to alter, to make things better. And she's talking about that openness there as well. Paper thinned by age or touching. Now, I've used touching on here. There's a lot of tactile language. Tactile meaning that you can get hold of things, you can feel it, you can interact with the paper. So we've got touching, smoothed, stroked. And the idea of human interaction with paper is very important for Imtiaz Darker. She's talking about how we should embrace that power, but that power should be moved over to us as much as held in the power. We should have the ability to see, to touch, to interact with things that make power. So the power is within the people, not within the paper. The kind you find in well-used books, the back of the Quran, where a hand has written in the names and histories, who was born to who, the height and weight, who died, where and how, on which sepia date. Now, sepia is that sort of browny black and white colour that you look at in old photographs. So she takes on a sort of nostalgic tone there with the sepia date. And she talks about how in the back of a Quran, and we'll talk about the religious meaning of that in a minute, she talks about how in the back of the Quran, people's names and dates are written in. So what's important to her on the paper is not the actual paper itself, but what it represents, what it brings to a family history. And it's deeply personal, because you're looking at your ancestors, you're looking at your relations and how they've been brought. And the use of that sepia suggests it's both distant but nostalgic. It's something that she longs for, something that we should all try and connect with, and that connection brought again back through the tactile words. Now, she deliberately uses the Quran. I've talked about her Pakistani heritage, but the Quran is seen in Western culture, at least, as a sort of divisive text, and it's not at all. It's actually a religious text, and we should celebrate that each of us have our own religions, our own beliefs, and the Quran is deeply personal to her, and it's deeply personal to her because of the people it brings in. It's not a religion of hate, it's a religion of family and togetherness, and this is what she wants to celebrate within the use of her text. Pages smoothed and stroked and turned transparent with attention. So the idea of smoothed and stroked and turned to attention, it's back to this tactile idea, but it's the idea that we should interact with those things that bring power. And actually power comes from the people within them, not from the paper itself.